Nickelodeon between 2000 and 2010 is not just a big deal. Depending on who you ask, that was the real golden era for the network. Everything from the television ratings. I mean, the shows themselves, it was banger after banger after banger. And yes, I am biased, because that isn't just when I was watching the channel the most. It's also the period of my childhood that I remember the most. So for the most part, I was pretty confident that when I went back to watch some of these shows, now as an adult who is married with children, I thought that I remembered what I was watching. And then I started seeing stuff that I could not unsee. Because I am a Christian man, so I don't know how to look at this without doing it from that framework. But Nickelodeon as a network has shifted and changed over time. And if you go all the way back to the 1990s, I'm not going to go over things that I went over in my earlier videos about, that era of Nickelodeon. I'm just going to put one point out there. In 1990, Nickelodeon dropped Are You Afraid of the Dark? It's the show that I believe really started it all. And when they did product testing, and they eventually came to the conclusion that parents really don't know what their kids are watching, so just focus on making shows that kids want to watch, even if it doesn't match what their parents want them to watch. People were going with this. And from that point on, Nickelodeon figured out how to take over, even if the parents weren't 100% of paying attention. So for the back half of the 2000s, because this is what I'm going to focus on, remember, it was banger after banger after banger. But you're going to notice that Nickelodeon 100% chose profits over parents. And I'm really not making that part up. So going forward, I am going to break down the biggest shows that Nickelodeon dropped in the back half of the 2000s. And when I say back half, I really mean 2004 on down. Because I already covered 2000 to 2003. Remember, we've already got SpongeBob SquarePants and shows like that on the boards, Fairly Odd Parents. Those dropped earlier. But they're going to keep on running through the 2010s. However, when it comes to this era, like 2004 on down, it's all about live action. Except for one unicorn. And that's where I'm going to start. Avatar: The Last Airbender, which dropped in 2005. This one isn't just a unicorn, and it ain't even just a banger. This is striking gold, like hitting the lottery, when this show actually hit. Because what these writers pulled off is a show that finally dignified children, but still hit them in the right zone. In the first episode, skipping over a whole bunch of stuff because I don't want to waste your time, you can go back and watch the show. At the end of the first episode, or really the first two-part special, because I remember watching that live, like watching it, sitting in front of an actual television, back in the cable era when you had to watch things when it actually came on. And the last lines of that episode, when his friend Katara, along with Sokka, but Katara specifically asked him, Aang, when we first met you, after everything that just happened with the Fire Nation trying to come capture you and so on, like, why didn't you just tell us you were the Avatar? And his response was, because I never wanted to be. That told me this show was headed somewhere. Every major character in the show actually develops. And they even figure out how to take characters who we start off hating, maybe not all of them, but some of them, and make us feel something for them as we go. Zuko, Uncle Iroh, and even Azula of the Fire Nation. When it comes to lessons from Avatar: The Last Airbender and so on, like, again, this is the unicorn of this era. Because on TV ratings, show did lights out. You go on IMDb, it has more, reviews than anything else you're really going to find on Nickelodeon, as far as I can tell. Very high-level reviews, like, very beloved. The show spawned spin-offs, Avatar: Legend of Korra, which I ain't really getting into. We had live-action movie, which failed. Then you had the Netflix live-action show, which is supposed to come back. And when you get to the core of it, even though the show is exactly that, a cartoon, there's real discussion that could actually be had about the world, people, relationships, how they work, how they function. And it does feel like there's an actual moral compass. So even coming from a Christian perspective, where you can actually see a lot of carryovers to the gospel, which I'm not going to get into right now, but I definitely will at some other point in another video, because there's a lot of carryover if you actually know what the gospel says. But fundamentally, Avatar: The Last Airbender isn't just a banger. It is everything that Nickelodeon would probably should have been doing all the time, because Nickelodeon tries to be adult in different points with their kids' shows. But in the 90s, they were just experimenting, throwing a whole bunch of stuff at the wall to see what stuck. And on a network that had SpongeBob SquarePants, the Avatar: The Last Airbender wasn't just like a change of pace. It was like a whole new demographic that they could tap into and hold on to because they had this show. But that is the last show like it that I've ever seen on the network, unless I missed something. And now is the moment where we hop into all the live action shows that really hit in the back half of the 2000s. Full disclosure, I'm not going to go over Victorious because that show drops in 2010. So technically it's not before 2010, so it doesn't make the cut. But hey, shout out to Victoria Justice because she got her start on another show, which you know which one I'm talking about. I'm gonna get to it in a moment. However, the other show I'm just not gonna mention is the Naked Brothers Band. I believe that dropped in 2007, but only ran for 41 episodes, and it really wasn't all that popular. There's a whole bunch of things we could say about it, but I don't really see the point, because not enough people watched it. I'm only gonna cover one other show that has a similar episode run, but it's just way more important, and it actually happened a little bit more to the core of what was going on at this era of Nickelodeon. But yes, Drake and Josh dropped in 2004. And when it did, you should already see the carryovers for what Drake and Josh became, because you took Josh Peck and Drake Bell and spun them off of The Amanda Show, which is basically a spinoff of all that. It was a sketch show that was spun off of a sketch show. And now we gave them their own program, the same way they did with Kenan and Kel. So in case you didn't know, Drake and Josh is just Kenan and Kel rebooted. Rebooted with those two instead of Kenan and Kel. But if you're new here, I want to say thank you for even making it this far into the video. I'm Ezra Garnett, and if you really want to know the truth about the hidden messages behind nostalgic TV, then you are in the right place. And if anything that I say actually connects with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe. But if I don't, just let me know in the comment section, because I try to read them all. As for the show itself, the show was pretty good. It was funny, and I would even argue that it has a more special place in my heart just because I was more alert to understand what was actually happening. But the show revolved around them as stepbrothers. Their parents get married, so now they are stepbrothers. They have a little sister, played by Miranda Cosgrove, who, yes, she's coming later when she spins off to iCarly. And unlike the little sister in Kenan and Kel, Miranda Cosgrove plays Megan, who actually has real plots that play out over the course of Drake and Josh. But that's not the point. What matters most is that Drake and Josh is carrying the trend forward, where remember I said profits over parents? Well, the parents in Drake and Josh don't really do much parenting. Just being real about it. Everything between Drake and Josh, like their plots, kind of carry as if their parents aren't really having any real impact. There are times when they show that they kind of care about their parents, but like I said, kind of care. Like, even have a moment, like a plot that's incredibly far-fetched, where Drake ends up marrying a girl from Udonia. And he does this without any parental, influence. Because in America, you can't just get married without, like a legal marriage, without your parents actually signing off if you're under 18. So I guess maybe he's over 18, but he's still in high school for the purposes of the show. Who knows? We're not getting into weeds about that. But the parents, like I said, if you dumb the parents down, we can take the plot a whole bunch of places. Remember, Megan gets away with a whole bunch of foolishness that wouldn't happen in a real house with parents who are actually doing things. When it comes to Drake and Josh itself, the show is funny. It was intended to be. There's a lot of memorable moments. Hug me, brother. All of that stuff. I think season 1 kind of kicks off well enough to kind of bring us in. But if you actually go back and watch, you'll notice some ideas in Drake and Josh that, in the name of comedy, they definitely push the limits beyond what most parents might be comfortable with. Even in season 1, I'm pretty sure that's where it was. Josh starts an advice column and calls it Miss Nancy, and he even puts on a wig and a dress and wears it on camera. Now, clearly that's some commentary about some part of him that, feels like a woman. They don't stay on this in other episodes, but they tried it, and they tried it early. If you see where I'm going with this. And then later on, we do get another episode where Josh's character, this is while he's working at the premiere, so this is, in a different season. He's real excited. Somebody's walking by, a person who we think is a woman. He grabs this person, gives them a kiss, and then the person announces that they are not a woman. That is the joke. So, yes, these moments happen, but that's really not dominating the entire show. But it's in there. Just to clarify, those things are in there. But Drake and Josh carried forward this trope of spacey parents in Nickelodeon shows, does it in live action, and this was probably one of the last moments where they even tried that hard with the parents. Because aside from this, there's only one other show to talk about. Nickelodeon basically just got rid of parents. They figured out that, the plot, we could just do whatever the heck we want if we just get the parents all the way out the show. And that's exactly what they did. The only other time that we saw parents show up in a Nickelodeon program that you might remember from this era is Unfabulous. It starred Emma Roberts as the main character, Addie Singer. She has her two friends, Gina and Zach. To clarify, we never see Gina's parents. I don't believe we ever see Zach's parents either on camera for the entire life of the show. And it only ran for 41 episodes. But you have to understand what was going on in this window to see why Unfabulous belongs on the list. Now, Addie does have, parents. In the first episode, I believe, more or less one of the pilots of this show is called The Party. So her parents are there, and they actually are seemingly trying to parent. But I guess some people would classify this as gentle parenting, because as a result, They let Addie have a party in the house. They remove themselves. They say, we'll go upstairs and let you party. We won't be present. They try to, I guess, use a webcam or something to spy on the party, but we will not physically be there. Addie tells them, like, oh, there's going to be kissing in the party and so on. And they're like, oh, we're fine with that. So you see how it's like this idea of like the parents kind of giving a lot more permission. Like they're parenting, but they're giving a lot more permission than what we would normally see in a kid's show. Again, normally they just make the parents idiots. Here they didn't go that far. They just kind of weakened like the presence of what they do as parents. And remember, the other kids, their parents, we just don't see them. The plots of the show are kind of interesting where, it's like the show is trying to take itself more seriously than almost anything else that I'm going to mention in this window of Nickelodeon, again, amongst the live action shows. So there are some life lessons and see the characters trying, learn about, okay, the impact of lying or, what does it mean to be a good person and how to relate. But one thing that stood out to me, because this isn't the last time they did it, but maybe it's one of the first times I really noticed it. When Addie is in school, which she does spend quite a few moments in the plot in school, a lot of it revolved around two things. So the primary is she is always interested in relationships, so that's a core tenet of the plot. Season 1 is almost just Addie chasing after this guy named Jake Bahari. Like, so much so she's even making songs about him, playing the songs on her guitar. I mean, I don't know if Emma Roberts can, really couldn't sing, but she certainly played a character who couldn't sing hardly at all. And, she even have a whole episode that's dedicated to her having written 66 songs about this young man, put them on a CD. I don't know how a CD holds that many songs, but hey, it is what it is. And, she's afraid that he might hear the CD with all these, love songs that essentially represent her almost like a stalker. But that's a large tenet of the plot. I mean, her friends are there, but they're kind of like, I kind of view them as accessories to Addie's life because Addie is the only person who we get a family. Like her parents, her brother. She's kind of living in her brother's shadow. Like the show takes itself seriously, but then I compare it to, A Boy Meets World, which isn't a Nickelodeon show. And yeah, that came in years prior. But that show also takes itself seriously, but just does it very differently. They lean all the way in the family. They start leaning into the families of the other characters. There's this sense of trying to pilot through. So like, Addie is almost like a female Boy Meets World, just done nowhere near as well. That is how I see it. And yeah, they do portray some things about, her and her school. Specifically, they make the principal the butt of the joke all the time, where she's just this mean and surly principal who just doesn't connect to the students, which I don't necessarily think is the most beneficial portrayal, because in a Boy Meets World context, the teachers are actual valuable characters in the show. But hey, that's just me talking, because Unfabulous didn't really hit that long. It only ran for 41 episodes because maybe it took itself too seriously. And Nickelodeon learned that lesson and corrected it and everything else they did in this era that actually did hit. Because during the exact same year, Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide came out in 2004. And that show is one that I thought I liked a whole lot when I was a child. Going back to watch it, because I watched all of Season 1, all of Season 3, and parts of Season 2. And that's all within the last year or two. So it's still pretty fresh. It doesn't have the same place in my heart now that it once did. And a lot of it comes down to me realizing that when it comes to killing off the parents, maybe Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide was probably the biggest opportunity that Nickelodeon took to actually do it. Again, emphasis on the biggest. We never, as far as I know, see a parent represented for any of the characters in this show. The entire thing occurs in Polk Middle School. Every scene occurs there, and the only adults we see are affiliated with the school. To keep it a buck with you, every adult represented in the context of the school, whether it was Vice Principal Krubbs, the teachers that they had, anybody else, for the most part except for one, Mr. Wright, I remember him, and it's even baked into the title, Mr. Wright. All of them are basically off their rocker in some form. It doesn't mean they don't offer some decent value at some point here and there. But the characters portray the teachers just kind of as weirdos. They even have a teacher called I-Teacher, who doesn't come to school and she's afraid to leave her home, and she even makes jokes about it, in the context of the plot. So they put the parents and the adults on that shelf. So now we have a world of children just kind of popping off, doing a bunch of randomness, and trying to figure out the world, but they're doing it all by themselves. Again, no parental guidance, because we don't need parents anymore. That's why we killed them out of the plot. Ned is the main character. He has his friends Cookie and Mose. We represent their friendship. Everything kind of angles towards, if you weren't paying attention, from early all the way down to you get to season 3, because they did 3 seasons, 55 episodes or so. By the time you get to the end, Ned and Mose actually develop a relationship, a dating relationship. So kind of made sense that the boy and girl who were friends were eventually going to make it down that path. And they point that direction, but a whole bunch of stuff happens along the way where, yes, love, dating, relationships is a very central plot tenet at that point. A bunch of other stuff happens, and they find a bunch of different ways to introduce comedy, but they keep pointing in that direction. But now, here's where we get to the things parents might want to know. Cross-dressing is a pretty big deal in the Declassified School Survival Guide. They did it in the name of comedy, but they did it a whole lot. Off-head, I remember Cookie and Ned dressing up as women multiple times. Cookie did it so much so where you actually get used to it. I remember one time he did it because he wanted to get into a girls-only book club. Another time he did it because he was trying to, get to know Lisa Zemo or something like that to learn what she likes. So because there's a girl he likes, and he wants to get to know her, his thought process was dress up like a girl to get to know her. How that works, I don't know. But it is what it is. There's a lot of, troubling imagery that played into this show. Again, it was consistent. Even go back to, earlier parts of the show where, again, parents might want to know this part. It's the best way I could put it, where they introduce a life science class where, Ned and Cookie end up raising a baby together for the purposes of the show or purposes of the class. And they even refer to them jokingly as the alternative family because there were no other, boy-girl pairs that they could put together. And that is a running plot that doesn't just last in one episode. Like, it carries into multiple episodes. So they're not just throwing this stuff at the wall. These ideas actually sit. As a child, when you're watching this, you're getting accustomed to seeing this imagery. I'm not saying that you can't have these conversations, but it's hard to have a conversation when the parents aren't in the room, which is what Nickelodeon assumed when they made most of these shows. Depending on how you feel about it, some of the nostalgia hit of Ned's Declassified did wear off a little bit when the Ned's podcast came out. And although the podcast does provide valuable insight on the characters, or specifically the lives of the actors as they're playing the characters, I think the other side of that coin is that perhaps they did overshare a little bit, and there's been some chatter online about that, which does kind of ruin some of the illusion. Because if you think back to Drake and Josh, which is a part of the Dan Schneider era, and there's other shows that are also in that era that we're talking about now, which, Quiet on Set addresses a lot of that. Like, even Drake Bell said himself that he doesn't want to let the specter of things that happened off camera affect how people receive what happened on camera. I think that's a very interesting point to consider because the show lives on. It does. And Ned's Declassified is one of those that push the envelope a lot in the name of comedy. But sometimes when they use a joke, a specific type of joke, and then use it over and over and over again, it has to beg the question, why? Because they tried it. Yet only 1 year after this, in 2005, was the show that probably means the most to me on this list. Because Zoey 101 dropped. Jamie Lynn Spears was the main character playing, and the show revolved around the Zoey and Chase, relationship, will they, won't they? That's how some people frame it. But at the end of the day, Zoey 101 wasn't just a show. They gave us a world that brought us in. Because at the end of the day, a whole bunch of young folk, myself included, wanted to go to Pacific Coast Academy, even though it wasn't even a real school. The show revolved around this boarding school, and again, remember I said, kill off the parents. So the only time I remember seeing a parent, the only time I remember it, are as follows. In the first episode, Zoe's father only, drops her and Dustin off at the school. Dustin is her little brother. And after that, the only other time I think I saw a parent that wasn't hers was Logan Reese had a parent in another episode. This is down the line in the plot where we see, his dad represented, I think it was almost two different actors. I don't even know if it was the same actor, twice. One where Logan gets his credit card taken away and the dad comes to discipline him. And the other time is, they did like a 2-part special where they did like a Battle of the Sexes episode. That actually happened. But Zoey 101 allows, group of friends, girls and guys to kind of get, kind of the mixture, because even though it's called Zoey 101 and we know she is the main character, we get to see the guys a lot in the context of the show. So you have the relationship between them, the friendships between them. There's the only dating relationship between the friends that really, is pointed to for the most part is potentially Zoey and Chase. Then later on, randomly toward the end of the show's run, you get Quinn and Logan who kind of, match up as a thing. The rest of it is a lot of, side plots and, things that are happening in the context of the school. Again, without any parents involved. We see some very interesting representations in terms of how they engage the adults, just being real. I mean, there was an episode that I remember where they had a new dean of the school and the girls thought the dean was attractive. And somehow there's a plot line that eventually ends up with this dean late at night laying across the laps of these young ladies in their dorm lounge. Now, why a grown man is in a dorm lounge with some teenage girls laying across them, beyond me. Wildly inappropriate and probably could get you, fired if, that played out, like the whole situation is wild. But like these are the types of things that happen in the plot. But Zoey 101 also pushes the envelope more than most people notice. Remember, I'm just giving you stuff off head. Things that maybe a parent might want to know about. if your 10-year-old is watching this show. As early back as season one, they did a school dance where they were supposed to be like a matchup where you would, fill out answers and they give you your perfect match. And everybody got a match, a boy-girl pair, at least in the main character plot, except for Michael, because his character gets matched up with a guy. I remember this, and they play that plot out, where he eventually goes to the dance and has a good time with this guy. Now, it's in the name of comedy, but you see where they're going with this. Because later on, we do get cross-dressing represented in a few different formats. Most people remember, when, some characters moved around, Victoria Justice joins the show. She dresses up as a boy in order to prove that she is no different than the guys. And she moves into a dorm as a boy. Now, how that works, once again, it's wild in the name of plot. But again, they tried it. Boys and girls, there's no difference between them fundamentally. And she's, in cross-dressing her way through that episode, at least all the way till the end. But that's not the end. Logan's wearing a dress because Quinn tricks him into doing it and has to walk through the campus wearing a dress and high heels. There's another episode that's a little bit different, where now we have one of Quinn's experiments that go terribly wrong. So now Logan and Michael are running across the campus. They're, naked. They have no clothes on except for they're wearing a trash bag. Like, these images are there, and they might be there in the name of comedy, but they are most certainly there in the show. And then there's some of the inappropriate things that play out that, Quiet on Set, I believe, starts to address a little bit, specifically with uncomfortable for the actors. There's a scene that was kind of more or less a foot fetish scene that played out. Like all of these things are there. So Zoey 101 was a funny show, and it brings us into this interesting world. Kill the parents off, and we can let the plots run. It did take itself more seriously than Ned's Declassified. I think that's one part of it. And then the world that is Pacific Coast Academy is just more engaging than Polk Middle School. No shade, just being honest. Anytime a show gets a reboot, you have to recognize that the original show must be a big deal. And Zoey 101 is one of those moments. I did watch the Zoey 102 reboot. I ain't gonna get into it right now. Maybe I will at some other time. But the one thing I will say that was very interesting to see how they moved the needle on those characters in the reboot. Because if the portrayals of the characters, specifically the men, in that show are any indication of what they were trying to point to in the original, well, it's definitely worth a whole lot more discussion. But hey, we ain't got time for that. Moving on. Because the biggest hit of all the live action shows in this era of Nickelodeon was actually 2007 with iCarly. Because when Miranda Cosgrove left Drake and Josh, got her own program. Again, other shows happened. They even tried to do a spinoff from iCarly. We ain't talking about that. What matters most is this thing runs for 95 episodes. Nobody else on this list that I mentioned even hit 70. Forget about 95. And the first thing I remember about iCarly above all else, because I did watch episodes here and there, but I didn't watch it anywhere near as faithfully as I did Ned's Declassified or Zoey 101 or anything like that. Remember the whole killing off the parents thing? But I just kept it rolling. Because this time we know that Carly has a father. But she doesn't stay with him. She stays with her brother. The plot kind of revolves around that. And her brother Spencer is a space cadet. He offers no real parenting at all. He's actually so immature, it almost feels like Carly is the adult in the relationship. So that happens. And she's a webcam star, again, kind of introducing us to the world of, live streaming and content creation before it really took off to where it became today. So it's almost like prophetic in that sense. And for that matter, maybe it helped to develop a whole generation of content creators. I mean, it's very possible. But again, when you kill off the parents or, portray them negatively, it does something for your plot in the direction of where you can go with things. Skipping over a bunch of details, just focus on the relationships of the characters themselves. We know that her best friends, Carly's best friends, are Freddie and Sam. Both of them have parents, but we really only see one parent represented in any way, shape, or form, and that's a mother. So fathers are now absent. Carly has a father, but we moved him out of the plot for the purposes of argument. And then for the other two characters, their fathers are entirely out of the plot. Just move them away, again, for the purposes of argument. They have mothers, and Sam's mother is portrayed as essentially a very poor mother, not very, caring or, invested in certain things about her daughter, and they kind of make jokes about her, almost as if, she struggles with addiction and so on and so forth. So that's that. On the other end, you have Freddie, who has a mother who's hyper overprotective to the point where, again, he's just trying to break away from her in order to do his own thing. Everything else that happened in the plot is a byproduct of that structure around it. Remember, we just came away from Unfabulous a few years before this, which tried to take itself seriously, at least to some degree. And now, this is the portrayal that we're getting. Yes, iCarly is fun. You have the webcam bits, you have the things that happen in school, you have, the crossover. I think they did an episode where I think Victoria Justice was even a guest character with like I fight Shelby Marks and so on and so forth. Like, the show was fun and engaging and lighthearted and all of that. Like, yeah, that's there. And if they even did a reboot, because when you run that long, makes sense that you would try to do a reboot. They did a real reboot show and tried to run that thing for, I think, 2 seasons or something like that on Paramount Plus. And when it comes to cross-dressing, although it might not be a thing with the main characters, when it comes to Carly's brother, Spencer, there's at least 4 times offhand that I remember where they put him in women's clothing. Just saying. Once again, parents, if you're not in the room, these images are there. And when you keep trying something over and over again, it's hard for me to believe that that's only in the name of comedy at that moment. When it comes to this era of Nickelodeon, which I myself refer to as the golden era, Nickelodeon had been experimenting for the 15 years prior about who they really were as a network. And they threw a whole bunch of things at the wall to see what was actually going to stick. And by the time they got to the back half of the 2000s, they really doubled down on live action. Real sitcoms, no longer just a sketch show like All That or The Amanda Show. Because I think maybe they realized that it was easier to kind of, draw out an actual sitcom for the purposes of, running the show. But when they did, they made a decision. And the decision was focus on the lives of the kids, which is understandable. But they always tried to slide it away from the adults. So much so that you eventually got to a point where you just start killing them out of the show. If you can build a world where parents are irrelevant, not only is that not the reality for most kids, but you can now travel and share and express ideas and cook them up in a vacuum because you don't have parental guidance. Coming from somebody who remembered being a kid, but I'm an adult now, and I am a parent, where would children be if we actually didn't have parental guidance? I don't think there's anybody who really believes that kids are better off without good parents who love them and want to help them grow into their best selves. That requires guidance. So when you have a show that takes itself seriously like Unfabulous, there's a reason why, even with parents who are still more watered down, it didn't hit. Because it's being compared to a bunch of other things where parents are either entirely out of the plot or made entirely irrelevant, like iCarly. And when it comes to the plots of the shows themselves, issues of morality are in the center. But where we land on those issues is very unique. Because when it comes to comedy, and that's normally how they tried to introduce it, whether it was Drake and Josh, iCarly, Zoey 101, Ned's Declassified, certain imagery kept showing up over and over and over again. And when you choose to keep doing that, especially if you do it multiple times in a row in the same show, it's hard for me to believe that that joke is just there because you think it's funny. I think you're actually trying to say something with that imagery. And once again, these are conversations that probably should be had, because Nickelodeon moved away from family television. The 1990s, on other networks, family TV was still a thing. Shows where we expected the parents and the kids would both watch the show. When you move away from that to create a different type of world, fully on the pretense that parents don't know what their kids are watching, not only taking a lot of, but it also can have results that are potentially concerning. Keep in mind, at the end of all of this, Nickelodeon still gave us Avatar: The Last Airbender. That was the banger of all bangers. The show that was a lightning in a bottle. I don't think Nickelodeon could ever remake that show. Because trust me, they tried. That's what Legend of Korra was. It just was nowhere near as good. And the real reason that show stood out, with the reviews and all the notoriety to back it up, because they actually pulled from the real world in order to create a fake one. They didn't try to make the world the way somebody wished it would have been as a writer. It was a cartoon world that they still pulled from reality. Actual historical notes and historical points to build a narrative that was engaging. Because the best stories ever told are already around us in the real world. Even if Nickelodeon can't help themselves from trying to push the envelope, because they think that is exactly what kids want. If you actually made it all the way to the end of this video, I do have to admit that thank you doesn't do it justice anymore, because you are a real one. And if anything that I said at all actually connected with you, it is always greatly appreciated if you would please like and subscribe.